Hi everybody, I'm Phil Fatika and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. A very special guest for you today. Let me introduce you to this gentleman sitting to my right and your left, Greg Loop. Greg has his master's degree. He is the president and the CEO of Family Services of Northwestern Pennsylvania. Welcome to Erie and welcome to TV.
Phil, thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Well, I know a lot of people have always said, I know what Family Services is, So what is Family Services? What do you do? When you go to work, what do you do?
Family Services is a great agency. It's been in Erie for well over 100 years.
Yes.
We've been providing human services to the Erie and Northwest Pennsylvania. And really what that means is we've got a committed group of professionals who provide an array of services from prevention, intervention, and even post-intervention kinds of services to treat behavioral and mental health issues.
And that's, you have no clients are abundant, I would think. Specifically, can you name some services that our viewers would say, well, gee, I really need to get a hold of these people? And by the way, is there a phone number, a website, or an address where they can go to? Let's do that one first. Phone number, website, address.
Phone number is 814-866-4550.
Okay.
And that gets them right to our intake staff.
Yeah. Okay.
Monday through Friday.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, I need you. So I'm going to call that number. You're located at 5100 Peach Street. I think most people know Upper Peach Street. I need your services, and I'm calling you, and I need help because my cousin, my aunt, my brother, my mother is becoming abusive with physical, which is, of course, very much in the news today with the NFL,
Absolutely.
or alcohol, or both, or she's out of control. I don't know what to do, but I know I need to help her. So I'm going to call Family Services. So Phil calls, and what happens? And
we've got trained mental health professionals. Our staff is going to greet you on the phone. They're going to schedule an appointment for you convenient to your time. We've got times available in the morning, times available in the afternoon. A lot of times, Phil, one of the questions that comes up is, what about insurances?
Right.
Availability of pay, and with the pressures on our economy right now, we've got families who are out of work, and those stressors further complicate the issues of abuse.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
And we're really fortunate here in Erie County. The United Way has made significant commitments to helping families really be able to address the issues of self-sufficiency. And one of the things they've done is underwritten some of the costs for treatment. Yeah. So even if there's not an ability to pay, we have a sliding scale fee for those folks. Yeah, so once they get there, we've got folks who, particularly on the trauma side of things, are trained in trauma interventions. Which means we're going to do an intake interview. We're going to start planning with them what the symptoms are that they're experiencing, alerting them to some other symptoms they may be experiencing, and then we've got some evidence-based, really literature-based interventions that show the ability to overcome and manage those stress symptoms and the trauma responses. And those trauma responses can happen with kids, they can happen with adults, and it has nothing to do with how smart people are. It doesn't have to do with how strong they are. It really comes down to you get exposed to a violent situation or you become a victim of something, and your body takes over in terms of having a traumatic response. And we can't predict which responses those are, but about 1 in 10 to 1 in 8 people who experience a significant trauma end up having a traumatic response from it.
Yeah. Let's stay current if we can. We mentioned the NFL situation, which is bubbling and brewing, and let's spin that a little bit backwards because in our area, and by the way, Greg came from York, Pennsylvania, just not too long ago. There's a lot of eruptions with the trauma impacting our youth. It is not just us. It is York. It is Harrisburg. It is everywhere. And I guess you can get an hour and a half with that one, so go right ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing that we need to be aware of is that when our children are exposed to these high-pace environments and high-stress environments, they're already set up for some potential problems. Throw on top of that exposure to violence, You know, the literature is telling us parts of the brain that respond to threat with either that, you know, freeze, or fight kinds of responses, stay fully alerted in our kids, and it ultimately results in some profound changes to their own brains. Now, these things impact their ability to learn from their environment. They impact their ability to make academic progress, and they keep them hypervigilant, so they start to see even normal social interactions as potentially threatening, which continues this state of hypervigilance. When that happens with kids, over a period of time, it reshapes how they interact with their society. They see their society as a frightening place. They disengage from their community. They remain hypervigilant, looking, you know, around the corner for someone to be attacking them. And as a result, they often are more likely to attack others, too.
A lot of blame has been placed, well, I shouldn't say blame, but a lot of conversation swirls around the video games that we have today, when you can't really look at a picture of a nude woman because that's pornographic, but yet you can play a game where you kill 400 people and that's okay, and yip, hooray, I did it, I reached the next level, let's kill some more. Comments on that?
It's certainly one of those things that I think people are looking at very carefully, wanting to ask the question, what's going to be the effect on our next generation? You know, I've seen folks in our field talk about the military doesn't necessarily expose people to that much violence early on in training in order to teach someone to kill. Sure. And yet we've got some of our kids being desensitized to what it means to cause harm or getting points or incentive to cause harm to other people through video games. And you have to wonder, what does that mean in terms of their ability to have compassion and be concerned about harm being inflicted in our communities? Oh,
absolutely, absolutely. So when you use the term family services, then you're also saying that it could be not just Phil, but my family, wife, my daughters, I mean, you know, and can you give me a specific example here? I know you have a lot of services. Can you give me a specific example of what I would need? You give me something and then we'll follow it through. Phil, you're coming in and you need me to do what is it? Okay, tell me what I need.
And Phil, let's suggest you're coming in because your adolescent is having some trouble at school.
Yeah, hates school.
And just
getting up in the morning and getting there on time, no. Yeah. Don't want to do that.
And so we've got services like our functional family therapy program that go into the home, work with families in their setting, help them develop strategies and goals with the resources available in the home.
But how do I get to you, Greg? Because I'm 15, my world is this big, you know. I don't know where you're located, I don't know your phone number. How do you find me? Or how do I find you?
In many instances, the way that our younger children find us is by two strategies. Either one, through our systems within place, children and youth, or the school districts making referrals to us, or number two, parents who can make those calls. And on the prevention side of things, maybe one of the ways, even before you're 15, maybe mom and dad got a hold of us when you were 10. And the reason they got a hold of us is we have a Big Brothers Big Sisters program.
Oh, okay. So you have a lot of
we have
agencies.
Prevention services, intervention services, and those post-intervention services. So on the prevention side, maybe we can get to you, Phil, when you're 8 or 10 years old. And the good news about that is the prevention costs, number one, are a lot less. Number two, if we can help families never have to experience that whole trauma of going through my child's doing bad and all the failures, if we can provide just the normal experiences for a child. So Big Brothers Big Sisters, we have about 120 kids involved in our Big Brothers Big Sisters program. That means that we've got volunteers within our community, adults who have stepped up and said, you know, I'm willing to donate some of my time. We're only talking a few hours a month. Right. And they'll come and say, you know, I can interact with a kid, and we'll set up some group activities for them. As some of those relationships start to form, they'll go out and we provide some screening and training so they know, you know, appropriate kinds of interactions.
You don't deal with foster parenting? Or do you?
We do have some kinship parenting, which is a foster parenting arm. We do adoption services. We do some of the home studies. So if the child wasn't able to remain in the home, a lot of times that means we're going to work with the extended family, and that's what our kinship program does. You know, rather than just place the child, you got an 8-year-old and they're going to have to go live with somebody they don't know. We'd much rather work with an aunt, an uncle, grandpa or grandma, you know, who's around in the community that knows this child. There's already a relationship, and we'll work with the family to help resolve some of those things.
This is Greg Loop. Greg is the President and CEO of Family Services of Northwestern Pennsylvania. I want to shift it to another area of your expertise, and that is there's been an enormous amount of press given, and I mean electronic and print media, given over toward the heroin epidemic that they believe is rampant in Pennsylvania, but rampant almost everywhere. And people admit that they're robbing banks to buy dope. How did we get there? Why is all of a sudden this becoming the, I don't know, drug of choice? Or I mean, willing to, I mean, you carry a weapon into a bank for armed robbery. That's 5 years without blinking. You don't know appealing that. They're willing to do that to be in control of the drug, or the drug's actually in control of them.
Sure.
So how did we get there? What is driving that? And we see this not happening in people that aren't too old, you know, 20s.
And you know, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is some of these chemicals are so addictive, and heroin is one of those chemicals that just, you don't get to use heroin socially. Yeah.
Let's have a beer and talk. Let's have a heroin joint. Let's inject.
And in fact, once the body has developed a dependence on it, there's significant symptoms of withdrawal, even to stop. And people feel like they're going to die from the withdrawal.
Right.
I mean, they talk about it being very painful.
Worse than quitting smoking, for sure.
By a long shot. We're talking very physically ill for days while it tries to clear from the system. So much of the use then becomes not just to get high, but just to avoid being sick. But kind of what got them there? Well, you look at their histories, and we're seeing in the research, again, these are folks who had sexual exploitation or other kind of traumas as kids. They were misfits in their family or in their community. They got disenfranchised from our culture in many instances. And some of the acceptance that they get in the drug community provided that substitute family or substitute culture environment. You've also got just, you know, the issue of some of the self-medicating that goes on, you know, when we're talking about my own emotional experiences felt bad, and I didn't have the ability to really manage those. I didn't learn those skills because my family didn't prepare me for that. And so I can feel good if I do this drug.
Sure. You mentioned at the beginning that you've been around 100 years for Family Services in one shape or form. So let's go back 100 years. Let's take it to 1914. And are we any different than what we were then? Or are we just able to identify these more easily, or just be more sympathetic to treating them, as opposed to just saying, you know, Loop, you're a pain in the neck, and we're putting you in here, and shut up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I just got done watching the Roosevelts, and one of the things that they sort of seem to say about Teddy, he was just so animated. And almost today, you'd say, hey, Teddy, you're going to time out, and you didn't take a Ritalin today, you know. But in the last 100 years, which might be too broad of a measuring stick, have we been able to identify these qualities of misbehavior, of behavioral deficiencies? I don't know. That's a broad-based question. You got it.
Phil, I think, you know, it's a great question to know. Have we made any progress over the last
thank you for saying
100
that
years?
Succinctly.
You know, and I think we all want to know that, are we getting better or not? And sometimes our memories, you know, we remember the good old days, and maybe they weren't. And you know, so you go back 100 years, 1914, and you ask, so what was going on? We were getting ready to go into a major conflict. And we just talked about heroin, and maybe a lot of people don't realize where heroin came from, but we were using it in the United States in the late 1800s by prescription.
Yes.
Because it was to treat the morphine addiction problem we had from the Civil War.
Yeah.
You know, so we've got these conflicts, we've got these wars, we've got these traumas, and we've got addiction problems. That, you know, and right after the, you know, that same period is when we outlawed alcohol.
Alcohol, prohibition.
Certainly wasn't
Sure.
a less violent society then. When you look back at what was going on in
Right.
terms of machine guns being on the streets and people using them at each other, you know, we think it's safer now, but in some instances, our data suggests that in incidents per 100,000, you know, we may have less violence overall, particularly in juvenile violence right now, than we did even 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we've gotten better a little bit. I think we've also focused our resources a little more, so that we're trying to do things not just about handouts without any kind of figuring out where it goes, but we're really trying to make an impact in a systemic way. So you know, we were dealing with the issues of, you know, children starving to death, and in fact, some of our early child abuse laws hadn't even come on the books yet. So
Could work to sunrise, can't see in the morning, can't see at night. Who cares?
Yeah, yeah.
You're
Well,
expendable.
And we had kids who were being harmed in horrific ways by parents or by employers. And our early child abuse laws were under the Humane Society. We had better laws for animals than we did children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as we're on that track, how are we doing globally with this? Are we leading the pack? Are we about in the middle of the pack? Or other countries are way ahead of us in being able to help the families?
Well, you know, I think that's a tough question to ask because, and answer, partly because are we talking about you know, our ability to provide medical care, our ability to provide behavioral health intervention, or and to what capacity? Because we've got some communities that really wrap around and provide a good deal of services. We've got communities in our Midwest where they don't have as much access to resource. And you compare that to something like the Scandinavian countries where it's a small community and it's been fairly stable. They've studied the families for 300 years.
Right.
You know, I think some of those smaller countries have a bit of an advantage on us.
Okay. Something came up recently. I noticed that young people today, they're not getting married. The family, the marriage is not a big deal to them. In fact, the statistic is 1 out of 5, 20% are saying, marriage, But then again, they may be living together, but not married. And then again, they may be living together and have a child, which of course throws the statistics everywhere from Thursday. But where are we headed with this? Are families more willing to say, I'm a little flawed, I need your help, or no, I'm too proud to admit that. No, we'll solve it on our own, even though we can't. I won't go to you because I won't admit that I don't know what I'm doing.
It seems like, as a culture, we're starting to get more open with saying, hey, we don't know everything, and it's okay to ask for some help. I think years ago, you know, you were supposed to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You were just supposed to know, somehow inherently, you were supposed to know how to manage relationships, how to manage adverse events for your kids, how to manage any bad thing that happened, and you just did it, you know, like John Wayne did. You know, and
Well said.
and the
The
truth
myth of
is,
John Wayne,
I think we know that that doesn't work, and so I think the good news is, even with the focus in the media recently on some of the domestic violence, that we're willing to talk about it. You know, talking about it isn't the answer, but keeping it a secret just perpetuates it.
It's perpetual, yeah.
So being able to open the door and start talking about it allows us then to have that community conversation about, so what do we do to make this better? And I think once we start having those conversations and identify some goals, that allows us as a group to come together and start to figure out how we make it better and what becomes acceptable.
I'm not sure, but I don't know if SafeNet is under your umbrella. That would be a place where abused people, mostly women, and their children can go for safety. I mean, there's a SafeNet. Does that fall under your expertise?
That's not one of the services we provide, but it's certainly one of the services we'd want people to know about and take advantage of. And I know when we've been working with some families who are experiencing those things, we want to provide that information. It's one of those other not-for-profit agencies in the community that really weave together to provide a good safety net.
So in a sense, Family Services is a clearinghouse in a sense. I can come to you and then you can direct me where I should be able to be sent to help whatever it is I need. Is that fair?
We're certainly able to provide some services, and the services that we don't provide, we want to make sure we refer to. You know, no one agency, I think, can do it all or be it all. And we recognize that as well, and so want to make sure that we refer people to the right places.
Again, this is Greg Loop. He is the president and the CEO of Family Services of Northwestern Pennsylvania. They're located at 5100 Peach Street, and the phone number there, because for the people who need your services, the phone number is
814-866-4500.
And there's a lot of confidentiality involved in this too, isn't there?
You know, we're an accredited agency, and we make sure that we adhere to all the standards under HIPAA. And so when
HIPAA
folks,
being,
I'm sorry,
that's okay.
that
I know what it is, but
the federal legislation regarding health insurance and Portability Act, but it provides for privacy of health information, and we make sure that when folks access our services, their records are private and all their information is private.
Okay, good explanation. All right, so here's why I get the big bucks. The biggest problems we have today, or the biggest problems you see that we have today with your agency, you can enumerate them. What's number one, if you can call it that, number two, or even they're tied, or number three?
You know, one of the things we talked about was violence in our community, and one of the things that goes unnamed often is the sexual violence. In our communities, we're talking about sometimes by estimates 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 children have some level of sexual exploitation before they turn 18.
Okay.
That's a huge problem.
That's huge.
And there's
disturbing.
There's not a good conversation yet about that. We're addressing, you know, the issues of Megan's Law. We've had, you know, different issues around the state addressing child abuse and child sexual exploitation. Our kids are on the internet, Facebooking, doing other social media, just doing what kids would do. 1 in 5 kids indicates they've had an inappropriate solicitation while they're out on that social media around sexual behavior. Those kinds of things, I think, pose an enormous risk and concern for our children. And when kids are sexually exploited, that's a trauma. When we look at one of the studies that I think is probably landmark at this point, came out by Kaiser Permanente, an insurance company. They looked at what are the behavioral issues that might be linked to some of the major health risks. And what they looked at was adverse childhood experiences, and showed that more than 3 significant adverse experiences, one of those being child sexual exploitation, you know, child physical abuse, loss of a parent, those kinds of significant adverse experiences significantly predicts long-term health conditions later on, including things like high blood pressure and heart disease. Wow. So they were looking at how can they impact physical cost of health care through behavioral health. And I think that leads into a second concern that I think we all have, which is what's going on with health care.
Yes.
And because we're part of health care, by extension, behavioral health care,
sure.
I think a long-term concern over the next 5 to 7 years is what's going to happen to our behavioral health care resources. We're fortunate that United Way and others have given to our agency to help us provide services to people who don't have insurance. But what about, you know, the delivery of this service over the next several years as that potential population expands? And we're recognizing more and more that it's the behavioral health that we can at least impact early on and change the cost of physical health care long term.
I think you touched on something which I've been reminded to me many times, is if I were sitting here and I had a bone sticking out of my arm, you'd say, Phil, you have to go get help. If I've been sexually abused or exploited, or I think I hear people talking to me, you know, sometimes that was looked upon as being sort of a taboo. We don't tell anybody about that. Come on, like you said, the John Wayne thing. Come on, partner, suck it up, you'll be okay. So I guess the bigger question is, I think we're getting better at doing that, though. We're recognizing that it's okay to ask for help, you know. It's okay, and I see that more and more, and I taught college, and I see that more and more in our younger population, too. The late teens, 20s, I see them as saying, you know, it's okay, I need a little help from my friends.
Yeah. Phil, I really hope we are. And when you talked about the bone sticking out, you know, nobody blamed you for having an injured arm.
Yeah.
And nobody thought somehow there's something wrong with you.
Wrong with me,
And the tough part in our culture is when it comes to the behavioral health issues and even the victimization issues. Somehow there's something wrong with me because somebody hurt me.
I'm going to spin that back, and I don't want to get into the NFL Ray Rice thing too much here, because that's just flying all over the media, and of course if anybody has a computer, well, they're an expert.
Sure, sure.
But I was somewhat interested in reading the woman's comments who was knocked out in the elevator. I just thought that shed some sort of a perspective on it, and then of course everybody chimes in on what that individual said about that. And I don't want you to get overflowing there, but that's part of when I was teaching school is I had children who lived in shelters because of the experience that they were with the father, and that opened my eyes immensely. That actually I didn't come from a family like that. My gosh, no, I love my father. I was an only child, so I got all the love.
Sure.
So I was okay. And my wife is one of 5, and it was just a different environment when there's 5 except in one. So, but thank you for bringing that out. I'm glad to hear you say that. Yeah, I'm not the victim here. Yeah, that's amazing. This is Greg Loop. Greg is he's the boss at Family Services and Northwestern Pennsylvania. We got a couple minutes left. Give us a kind of a vision of what you do and where you think we're going. You got about a minute to do that. Not to put you on the spot.
Well, I think where we're going and what we'd like to do to influence that is we're going in a direction that says there's going to be more intentional intervention with behavioral health. We'd like to see us remove the pejorativeness. No shame in needing assistance. We all do. We'd like to be partners collaboratively with the families and with other services to be able to build a safety net around our families, because ultimately none of us pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We all worked together, and we'd like to be part of that community working to address those who have been somewhat vulnerable and are in need, provide services to them, and in turn they're going to become functional members of our community that will be able to do that for others.
Well said. Thanks for being with you.
Phil, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Continued success. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time right here on the Millcreek Government Channel. Until then, I'm Phil Fatika. Take care.
You're watching the Millcreek Government Channel, powered by WQLN Public Media.